VA does not do this, but this is ideally what we want to happen. So if you were in one of those situations and there's part of you and the experience that's split off, we want to bring you back together and make you whole. We want to connect you with your body and all your feelings and help you to work through the events and the trauma and whatever happened. 40 to 60% of women with military sexual trauma go on to have a full-blown case of PTSD. Military sexual trauma is the #1 cause of PTSD among women. So, symptoms. Shame and humiliation, big, men and women. Anxiety and despair, men and women. Feeling dirty and unclean, men and women. Lack of trust in men, that I don't know if that happens to the men. I do know it happens to the women, that they don't trust men after being assaulted by them. Health issues. So remember that energy I said that got stuck in the body? Well, that energy that's stuck in the body has to go somewhere. So it finds a vulnerable place in the body, sets up shop, and creates some illness. A lot of the immunosuppressant illnesses, autoimmune diseases, a lot of those are because of the assault, the feelings that the person has, the self-judgments, and the energy that's got to go somewhere. So it goes systemically in the body. So other issues, problems with intimacy, sexual dysfunction, problems in relationships, poor work performance, misuse of alcohol, and or drugs. So now, I want to go through this with you. I'm going to give you all a copy of this. So let's go through these, because these are the symptoms, the PTSD symptoms, that can come from military sexual trauma, but also from other kinds of experiences that lead to PTSD. So these are the symptoms of PTSD. And you can see there's a lot of them. There's 30. So let's just go through real quick. The first one is the emotional numbing that I talked about, and it's an attempt to wall off feelings. So when we are, I wonder if I can read this on my glasses, yeah. When we are in these situations that are really overwhelming to our psyche, one of the ways that we try to protect ourselves is by this numbing to wall off our feelings. Like in Vietnam, for the first 6 months of my Vietnam experience, I wasn't numb and walled off. But I had a horrendous experience right in the middle that caused me to, I did it actually consciously because I was trying to get out of the OR. I was just too much, it was too much. And I literally focused on building a brick wall around my heart so that I could, oops, I forgot about that thing. So I can go back to work. And so when I went back, I was able to function, but I was different. I didn't realize it. I really didn't realize it. But all of my memories from that moment on, all my memories changed. No longer were they vivid color. They changed. They were like, not exactly black and white, they're more like brown and white. It's like sepia color. All the memories changed. But I'm saying that this emotional numbing is what people do that have PTSD, to wall off their feelings because it's too overwhelming to deal with. And so one of the things in therapy is to bring that down. But you have to be in a safe situation, a safe environment, and have learn ways to cope and deal with opening up to all that. So, let's see, how much, we're done what, 2:05? Okay, so we're good. So then depression. If you know anybody that has PTSD, or if you have it, you know that you get depressed at times and it's really heavy and despairing. Alienation. So this is from the emotional numbing. You're split off from your feelings, but it splits you off from yourself and others. So that's where that comes in, Ray, right there. Alienation means that it's really hard to connect with other people. And it's because you're not connected to yourself. So good therapy helps you reconnect to all of you, all your feelings, and then you can connect with other people. I I don't know how the VA does with that part of it. And then anger and rage, particularly Vietnam vets. Anybody know a Vietnam vet that didn't experience anger and rage? So if you were sexually assaulted, of course you're going to feel anger and rage because you were helpless and couldn't do anything, couldn't fight back. Guilt. So guilt could be, why didn't I move faster? Why didn't I get out of the way? One of the women whose story is not in the book, because she wouldn't allow me to, she was airborne, military police, very fit, extremely fit. And she was raped by her commander. And to this day, she is full of anger and rage because she still believes she should have been able to stop it from happening. Yeah, because she was so strong and fit. But, when somebody is plotting and they're in charge of the whole thing, it doesn't matter how powerful or strong you are, you're going to get overcome by it. So anxiety and fears, these might be specific to the type of event that it was. If you're in an automobile accident, flood, or in the war. We used to have rats that ran along the 2x4s above my bed. So I had an inordinate fear of rats, right? Let's see. Intrusive thoughts. Anybody have intrusive thoughts? Yeah, they're really horrible because they come on their own, unbidden. You don't want them there, and they're there. And sometimes they're like daggers, just jabbing at you. Intrusive thoughts. So they're uninvited, and they're very intrusive. Nightmares, flashbacks. So does everybody know what a flashback is? Is there anybody that doesn't know what a flashback is? Okay, good. Helplessness, hyperarousal, being on guard, tense, hypervigilant, hypersensitivity to anything that reminds you of the traumatic event or experience. So here's where a lot of smells come in. So vets, and some of you know this, you could be out in public somewhere and get a whiff of something that was like something back in the midst of the trauma. Especially the olfactory, the smell, it goes right into the brain, right in there. And so that one thing could trigger you, just that one smell. Like me, I, as a nurse, what brought the casualties? Helicopters. So I could be anywhere in the world. I hear a helicopter, my whole body gets ready for casualties. Avoidance of activities that trigger recall the trauma. So those of you that have PTSD know that you don't want to go anywhere where you're going to be in any way triggered or reminded of what happened to whatever it is that is your trauma. So that's what that means. Isolation, that goes along with the numbing, feeling distant to others, staying to yourself, and that's what a lot of people with PTSD do. Mental turmoil. So this, I want to go over this one. So you're trying to deal with the world outside and your own inner world while staying safe, feeling safe, blocking your feelings, taking care of flashbacks or blocking them, and then the intrusive thoughts, and at the same time trying to understand what's happening to you. Just that one thing alone is in itself pretty horrendous to deal with, right? The mental turmoil of having PTSD. Attempts at control. So this is really, what I'm talking about here is, it often happens like right after the trauma. So what a lot of the women do, and I don't know if this happens to the men, but what the women do is they'll often take showers for hours. Literally showers for hours, trying to get it all off. Yeah. So these little attempts at control often happen right after the trauma. So like, let's say your car gets demolished in an accident and you're trying to put the hubcap on. It's a simple little thing that makes no logical sense, but it gives you something to do and focus on rather than the traumatic thing that happened, right? Emotional lability. I don't know if you've ever heard that word. So what this is, it's believing if you get angry, you might kill someone. It's like it goes all the way to the extreme. Or if I start crying, I won't be able to stop. And then number 18 we're up to, fear of the replay of the traumatic event or experiences, fear of flashbacks, memories of the event. So I can tell you from my own experience that, so this was back before I did my healing work, and I was really in my PTSD at the time, and I was actually driving to Tacoma to work, and there was an army truck on the road right in the lane beside me. It was just a regular army truck, except that it triggered me, and all of a sudden it was not just a simple army truck. It was filled with the faces and bodies of all the soldiers that I remembered, and their faces and their eyes, the pleading eyes, all of that. It was just filled with it. And that was actually my first flashback. Oh, you know, you don't ever forget that. So I'm on the freeway, and I was in not all the way over, but I was in pretty far over in the lane, and I'm holding on to the right white knuckle, and all I could think of, I've got to get off the freeway, right? I got to get off here. And so I did. I pulled off, and my whole body was shaking at the time. And I never, ever wanted to have, whatever that was, I didn't want to have another one of those ever again. And I used to think that I could stop them. That was back before I knew any of the stuff I'm telling you. So that's the fear of replay of the traumatic experience and fear of flashbacks and memories of the events. It's fear that it's going to happen again. Difficulty concentrating. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Crying spells, suicidal thoughts, feelings, and actions, loss of memory, and that often occurs after the numbing sets in, and you can lose memories of the event or parts of it. Like I still have there's still a part of my memory, the day in Vietnam when I say that I snapped, I remember like the first part, and then there's another part that I don't remember of my memory, and I've never gotten that part back. 23, negative self-image. This is very, very true when there's been military sexual trauma, that you have low self-esteem and your image of yourself is very negative. Problems with intimacy, can't trust yourself or others. And then there's this one on here that's called elite. No one could possibly understand what happened to me or how I feel after the traumatic event or experience. It's just that kind. Contaminated, feeling contaminated for life, never be the same again. Loss of interest in work and activities, fatigue. And the fatigue comes from the psychic energy used to defend yourself against the feelings and the intrusive thoughts and memories. And then the last one is cynicism, lack of trust in authorities and systems, which was really, really true for the Vietnam vets. And I don't know if that's as true today for Iraq and Afghanistan vets, but it definitely was true for the Vietnam era vets. So women who've experienced military sexual trauma can have a full body reaction to the presence of men, especially if they're in close proximity with them, and if you're coming from behind. So as your Veterans for Peace, just be sensitive and aware of that. If you're around women veterans, or if you think it might be a woman veteran, and you're coming just because of the direction that you're going in, you're coming up behind them, it's a good idea to use your voice before you get too close and say something. You know, my name is David, and my name is Jean, and I just want you to know I'm walking up toward you from behind, and I'm aware of you, and I'm not going to hurt you. That's right. Very right, yes. If you know that they've been sexually assaulted, then definitely never come up from behind. Yeah.
Same is true for male also.
Male, yeah. If you know, yeah. So it's just about being aware. So military sexual assault, harassment, and rape have escalated in recent years, and now there are over 26,000 a year. We know that. 71 per day. Every 20 minutes, one of our service members is being sexually assaulted. Rape by soldiers, commanders, doctors, and gang rape of our men and women in the military must be stopped. In 2012, there was a 35% increase in military sexual assaults. Between January and September of this last year, 2013, up 50%. And we know that 23% are assaulted at our military academies. You'd think the elite in the military academies would be above that? No. This is the statistic I want you to remember. 95% of the rapes and assaults to military personnel are from repeat offenders and serial rapists. So there is a criminal element in our military that is literally destroying it. Perpetrators can calmly sit down and claim that the rape they did was consensual sex, and that's problematic. But you know what's even more of a problem from my perspective? The commander accepts it because he likes this guy, because these guys are very likable and they're good soldiers, except they do all this horrible stuff. When a rapist confesses, which is relatively rare, but when a rapist confesses, the military ignores the confession and instead charges the woman with making false statements and basically makes her life a living hell. They violate her rights and make her life a living hell. And there's a story in here, Sally Griffith's story in here, and you see what happened to her. 62% of the women who report sexual assault are retaliated against very severely and often lose their health, their careers, and in some cases their lives. I don't know, I think men tend not to report it. I think we find out about men after the fact, like after they get out. Military sexual assault changes everything. So our military, our military does, it has this so-called zero tolerance policy, and they tout that, but do you know that they foster a culture that supports rampant sexual assault? So a woman or man who experiences sexual assault may never be the same again. She or he may never feel safe or confident again, and depending on how others respond to them after the assault, they may be able to heal and move on. But if they're not believed, or if they're doubted, or they're shamed, or they're humiliated, or not given the care that they need immediately, if they're not treated with dignity and respect and without compassion, then they're likely to be left with serious symptoms that may become permanent. So a lot has to do with how they are dealt with and received when they report, right, afterwards. The way that our military handles sexual assault is disrespectful, cold, and harsh. Women are shamed, humiliated, denied compassion, denied medical care, protection, and they're also denied appropriate investigations and prosecutions of perpetrators. Women who are sexually assaulted in the military and reported are denied justice. That's actually the reason that I decided to write the book. So I want to tell you a story. Petty Officer DeRoche, Navy, was raped by 2 sailors repeatedly in one session, right? Kind of a gang rape thing. They each took turns raping her. And she was taken for examination, a medical examination. The doctor became emotionally distraught at the damage that was done to her. After his examination, she was put on a medical ward, and she was held there as a prisoner and denied food. That's the kind of retaliation I'm talking about. Then she was made to be on call 24 hours a day so that she couldn't seek help, medical or counseling help. That's the way the military is handling this. So we need to find a way in our military to hold offenders accountable and to punish criminal behavior, and they're not currently doing that. I want to tell you a guy's story, Michael. So Michael had not told his story for 19 years, and then he decided to come out and tell his story. And so he was telling a story, and he was on the radio telling a story. And a guy heard him that was active duty from Afghanistan. And he heard Michael telling a story. And this active duty soldier from Afghanistan was actually home at the time that he heard this. And he had come home specifically to kill himself because he had been drugged and raped over there. And he'd come home to kill himself, but he heard Michael on the radio telling his story, and he heard that phone number. And he called Michael, and he talked to Michael. And Michael was just new at telling his story, but because that guy called him, he is alive today. And he was able to get help and didn't have to go back to Afghanistan. But it's really important to tell the story. And Michael, I asked Michael, when I talked to him on the phone the other day, I asked him, what did he want me to tell you? There it is, a little note. What could I share with you? And he said to tell you that it's not your fault, and you're not lesser because of it, and to speak out and tell your story. So, yes, it happens to men and women, and it's happening more and more, and it has to be stopped. And that's the passion with which I ultimately wrote this book. You're right.
Commanders or even chaplains, and they tell you to sweep it under the carpet.
You're right, because that's the protocol. It's in all of the military services. The protocol is to protect the image of the Corps, protect the military. That's a lot of what I wrote about in there, and they've been doing it for decades, and they don't want to give it up. Even now, they're holding on to their power and control in the military so that it's not taken away from them in these cases. And a lot of us are working to get it taken away from them, because as long as the chain of command has as much power and authority as they do, this is not going to change. You're not safe to speak up, and neither is the victim of the assault. Well, my idea, with the reason I wrote the book, is to shine a light on what's happening, get enough of the public to know what's actually happening in the military, so they raise their voices. These are civilians, the public, and veterans, right? To get the public, to get Congress to actually act, take a particular action that will take authority of these cases out of the chain of command, right? And start really changing the culture in the military. I think they need to discharge these 95% rapists, right? Because they and the commanders that cover up for them, as long as that goes on, it's going to continue, but it's not good for people who really care and who really serve well and who hold to the values that we all appreciate, where you don't assault other members of the military, right? Anxiety, depression, body pain, emotional distress, PTSD symptoms. What you need to do, tap them down. So the first thing you do is you identify how distressful is the experience you're having. Anxiety, fear, whatever it is. So you measure anxiety down, depression down, headaches down, flashbacks down, you name it. If you want to know more about it, there's a lot written about it too. Gary Craig, Emotional Freedom Technique. And there's a great film called Operation Emotional Freedom, The Answer. And you'll see this done on Vietnam vets that nobody could help. And he did this at the VA. He showed the VA how powerful it was, and they were very successful. And you would think that the VA would want to offer that to our veterans, right? No, they didn't. They have this thing with the pharmaceutical company. They just want to drug you. So, All right.
We're speaking with journalist and author Dar Jamail about his latest reports in Al Jazeera English. Dar Jamail, I want to turn now to the stories that you've been writing about military sexual trauma, MST. Rape evidently rampant in the U.S. military. And let's start with what you wrote about Susan Avila Smith, who advocates for veterans and finds the command not taking these crimes seriously.
Only because enough pressure has been put on the Pentagon by actually certain folks in Congress and senators, but then primarily, of course, because of groups like Susan Avila Smith and the Service Women's Action Network, SWAN, and most recently the ACLU, who just last week filed a lawsuit against the Pentagon trying to force them to reveal records they continue to withhold that really show the deep extent of the amount of military sexual assault and harassment in the military. And to address the question of is this getting worse or is anything the Pentagon doing having any effect, well, according to the Pentagon's own report just released last week, when we talk about just the U.S. military academies, that the incidence of reported rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment has risen 60% over last year. This is clearly a show that whatever they're doing is failing dismally, and not correcting what people like Susan Avila Smith and other activists and advocates like herself see as a deep structural problem that will not be corrected without radical systemic change.
We also spoke with the Yale Law students who are working with SWAN, the Service Women's Action Network, and ACLU on the case you mentioned. And they told us that the types of acts we're talking about, military sexual trauma, occur nearly twice as often in the military as they do in the general public. Now, is that consistent with what you found in your research for your Al Jazeera report?
What I'm seeing is that there's all these advocates and groups and study groups are actively pressuring the Pentagon. The recent ACLU lawsuit, including some of the groups you just mentioned, to really force them to reveal records they have that really would show the deep extent of the problem and how systemic it is, and also how flawed the Pentagon's response has been.